sing a little bit, Peter, what a wonderful world this would be, according, obviously, to NATO GCC. This is what they're trying, It's the same old story. The US, the Brits, and the French inside NATO. The Brits and the French are trying to convince the other NATO members that lethal weaponizing of the rebels is the way to go. The GCC, of course, those paragons of democracy, including the House of Saud, of course, which has been doing that for, in fact, over 2 years now, in the black market, via Croatia, you name it. And, of course, Israel. Israel just jumped in because the plan A, which was the lethal weaponizing of the rebels, was not working. There was this red line after red line. Everybody got lost in this Hollywood shuffle. At the same time, they noticed that the Syrian army was progressing instead of regressing in the Hama Homs corridor in Syria. So the so-called rebels, the Free Syrian Army gangs and Jabhat al-Nusra style jihadis were losing ground. And at the same time, Sheikh Nasrallah went to Iran. He had a get-together with Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. They are very tight, so an attack on each one of them is an attack on all of them. So what to do? Plan B. Call Israel, something that was already decided between Chuck Hagel and his tour of the Middle East recently, Israel and the petromonarchies. Israel does it. If there are Fateh 110 missiles struck by Israel, good for Israel. If they are not, they still deplete Syrian army arsenal, and we start all over again with Plan B. So I expect more attacks sooner rather than later. In fact, all of U.S. think tank land, left, right, middle, whatever, they know that Washington is selling itself the myth that the CIA is screening which weapons go to which groups. This is completely absurd. Obviously, these people have never been to Syria. They have never been to the Turkish-Syrian border, and they don't know the players. Saudi Arabia and Qatar, their agenda is not Washington's agenda. It's completely different. Qatar, they want some kind of Muslim Brotherhood-led government in Syria. And the House of Saud, they want a Wahhabi emirate, which is going to breed lots of al-Qaeda-style types later on. Their agenda is completely different, and they are arming themselves. Sometimes it goes through Turkey. Sometimes it's screened by the CIA in southern Turkey. But we don't know who gets these weapons at the last resort. And most of these people are getting the weapons indirectly are Jabhat al-Nusra, because they have very good connections, for instance, with the tribal sheikhs in Al-Anbar province in Iraq. A lot of commanders that affiliated with Jabhat al-Nusra, they're not Syrians, they're Iraqis. They were fighting the Americans in Anbar province 2004, 2005, 2006. I met some of these people at the time over there, and now they're in Syria. They are doing the back and forth across the border.
Iraq has a lot to do with it. Their civil war, then let's call it what it is, it's a civil war, is spilling into Syria. Everyone's trying to get their piece of bread, get the big piece of bread here. And Pepe's right. The CIA, it's the same old song and dance. They've been doing it for 40 years. They did it with the Taliban. You saw what happened there. And it's, there's no excuse for it, really. And yeah, they are selling. There's a couple things that they're selling. One thing that they're selling, that they tried to sell late last year, was that the FSA was this united, Western-style military, and that's anything but the case. Yeah. They're totally fractious, and they're fighting amongst each other. They're fighting Jabhat al-Nusra, and everyone's vying for power right now. So, there's really only two good options here I see. One would be that we're able to keep Assad in power, and he's able to come to an agreement with the rebels in which they all get a piece of the pie, something kind of like how Lebanon's government is. And the other one is if the FSA can unite, and I just don't see that happening. And the more that we arm these guys, the worse off it's going to be. I mean, Libya is still a mess, and you saw that spilled south into Africa. It's just a giant mess, and giving them weapons isn't going to solve anything. So
trying to do that, and the Americans have been saying no. Because Obama, one of the first Obama lines is Assad had to go. Yeah. And now the Obama administration is saying, look, after 2 years, he's not going. He still has support in Damascus. The business classes in Damascus and Aleppo, there are no major defections in the Syrian army. I have to say that every day, because people in America, they are not listening. 1 or 2 generals that defect after a few months, these are not major defections. They still control the army. They are fully weaponized. So it's not going to happen. The only possible solution, I agree, from the beginning, Russia was proposing that. Let's sit down at the same table, all the players, including all the regional players, and that includes Iran as well at the table. And the Americans have been saying no.
In a situation like this, it's
you can't just look
thinking.
beyond Assad. You have to do something to get beyond Assad.
Chris, jump in. Go ahead.
What exactly are we going to do? I mean, we're talking about beyond Assad as if it's already been written. Okay. How exactly do we do that? Because I'll tell you what, he's shown recently that his military is quite capable of pushing the rebels back.
Okay, Chris.
So what do we do? Airstrikes?
Let's go to Chris first. Gentlemen, let's go to Chris.
Insurgencies like this.
Chris, go ahead.
Insurgencies like this, last for decades. There's no way that Assad could potentially hold on to power for a number of years, if the international community continues not to take any kind of action. But in the end, he's going to go. And the question is, what's going to happen then? I agree with you about that. And the reality is that we need to do everything we can to protect all sides, including the Alawites in Syria, from some kind of a major slaughter. And that's going to require a lot more international cooperation, including between Russia, the United States, and NATO, and our partners in the region than we're getting right now.
Pepe, go ahead.
Now, not only the Alawites, Christians and Kurds as well. The Kurds, they are in northeast Syria. They already have a measure of independence. So in practical terms, it's autonomy. They would love that to continue, in fact. The Christians know that if there is a Wahhabi-style Sunni hardcore post-Assad government, they are doomed. And so are the Alawites as well. So if you have everybody at the same table, of course, with Russia, Iran, and the Saudis, and all the GCC petromonarchies, plus the Westerners, then at least some sort of adult conversation can ensue. They're not even talking at the moment.
All right, Jeff.
To answer your question, depends on what's going to happen in the Iranian presidential elections next month. All the candidates so far, they are very, very close to Khamenei. So this is not going to change. This means they are very, very close with the Revolutionary Guards as well. Syria is a red line for Tehran, and Hezbollah support is a red line for Tehran. How they're going to respond to what's going on at the moment, we're going to see maybe in 2 or 3 months after we have a new government in place, where we'll have a president answering directly to Khamenei policy and not clashing with him like Ahmadinejad and his cabinet. But the thing is, in terms of missiles, even if we don't know from any source whether Hezbollah bought these Fateh 110s from Iran. Even if they didn't, they have a similar missile, the M600. Syrian technology. It's almost as good as the Fateh 110s. So the case of if they were attacking Israel in the near future, they would use the M600s. They don't need the Fateh 110s. Of course, everybody is on the ground. Not only Iran and Syria and Hezbollah, but the GCC petromonarchies, especially the Emirates, Qatar, and the House of Saud, not to mention the logistical support of Syria. And yes, I agree with our other guest. It is already a regional conflict. It's going to get much worse, especially because the West, via US, Britain, and France, they see they are totally impotent to conduct anything on the ground. And now we have jihadis let loose inside Syria. We're going to have Hezbollah playing against al-Qaeda, which is a neocon wet dream, of course. And we have the back and forth of jihadis between Iraq and Syria. Carla Del Ponte is not a suicidal operative. This is ridiculous. If she said that, it's because she has evidence. No wonder the UN started backtracking the day after. And no wonder the Americans were stalling this UN investigation from the beginning. Just talk to Sergei Lavrov. That's what I was going to tell you.
I think that partition is certainly one of the possible outcomes.
Go ahead.
This is what Israel and the neocons have been dreaming for over 10 years. Just look at the Saban report about regime change and, of course, later maybe partitioning of Syria. Look at what Seymour Hersh was saying already in 2007. Okay, divide and rule, a weak Syria, divided into 3 warring feuds, just like Iraq is already partitioned in 3 states.
All right, gentlemen.
Chossudovsky, Syria's President Bashar al-Assad says Syria is capable of facing Israel. Just how much do you think there will be a military confrontation between Damascus and Tel Aviv? And which do you think can overcome the other?
Let me first address the statement of Secretary of State John Kerry. The United States was involved in the decision to bomb Syria. This was not strictly an act of aggression on the part of Israel acting on its own. It was an act of aggression which was approved by the United States, namely the Pentagon, as well as NATO. It is an act of aggression in violation of international law. Now, when Secretary of State John Kerry says we need to reach a solution and presents himself as a mediator, we are in effect in a dead alley, because an aggressor presenting himself as a mediator is a non sequitur. You can't, on the one hand, support an armed insurrection of terrorists against the Syrian government, and incidentally provide chemical weapons to these al-Qaeda terrorists, give them funding. In fact, CNN just a couple of months ago confirmed that contractors hired by the Pentagon were in fact training the terrorists in the use of chemical weapons. And now we have a statement by a United Nations independent commission which has confirmed unequivocally, and it was revealed on the same day, that the terrorists who are backed by the United States and its allies, they are in possession of deadly sarin nerve gas, which they are using against the civilian population. So we can talk about reaching a peaceful solution, but the issue there is those who are acting as mediators, including Secretary of State John Kerry, and I should also say Ban Ki-moon, because the Secretary General of the United Nations has called, quote, on all sides to exercise maximum calm and restraint. There was absolutely no word of condemnation uttered by the United Nations Security Council Secretary General of the United Nations, against Israel's attack on Syria, and neither has there been a position taken by the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So we're dealing with an act of aggression. We are at a very dangerous crossroads. Vladimir Putin warned, that was yesterday, that further Israeli attacks on Damascus would not be tolerated. He also intimated, but this is something that we know, that Syria has advanced air defense systems, S-300, and various other weapons capabilities, and they are able to strike back. However, we are at a very dangerous crossroads, because anything could happen, and this could ultimately lead into a regional war where other countries would inevitably be involved in the conflict.